Do you have a cat or two? Or 5? If so, I'm willing to bet you've encountered this issue before. Or this one, or this. Let's be honest, traditional cat litter sucks. Yet why is this still the go-to solution for most of us cat owners? The reality is there's an option out there that's better in just about every single way. And now that I've built this, there's literally no reason not to make the switch from traditional clumping litter over to these wood pellets. Now, for all you non-cat owners, this channel isn't about pet products, and this isn't necessarily even a channel about how I build things like this. This channel will focus on how I am attempting to overcome real-world issues, not by trying to make products designed around the current accepted solution, but instead taking a step back and thinking outside the litter box, if you will. If you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon. I can't overstate how much your support is appreciated. Now back to the cat. It's easy to just assume that if something is used by everybody, it's probably the best solution for the job. In the case of clumping cat litter, this stuff has been around forever, and I see why. With its cement-like properties, it takes liquids and turns them into solids, making cleanup time a seemingly easy process by allowing a scoop or even a robot to handle both the liquid and solid waste simultaneously. But I've yet to meet anyone that doesn't hate the stuff. The clumping property that makes daily cleaning simpler also adds a list of complications in the long term. Sure, it's easy enough to scoop the litter box every day, but sooner or later, you'll have a litter box caked with urine-soaked clay that has to be dealt with. And those cool robots that claim to clean the litter for you, well, the same thing happens to them too. Even worse yet, this litter never stays in the box. You'll find tiny little rocks all over your house and in your bed, on your furniture, and people have tried to solve this with an array of mats or special floors that attempt to mitigate this, but it just never solved the problem completely for us. One tiny rock in the bed is enough for me to want to find a better solution. And instead of trying to engineer a bunch of individual products to solve all of the clumping litter problems, I wanted to consider that maybe the litter itself was the problem. While everyone else was trying to solve the individual issues that come with clumping litter, I thought there might be an alternative solution with a different set of problems, and just maybe those problems have simpler solutions. Then we discovered wood pellets. This stuff is sold as either fuel for wood pellet fireplaces or as animal bedding, which makes it easy to find and far more affordable than the clumping litter. It has the opposite effect of the clumping litter, where it really doesn't stick to anything, meaning your litter boxes will require less frequent deep cleaning, and more importantly, our cat's paws stay litter-free, meaning no nasty litter being tracked all over the house. The natural wood scent even hides bad smells amazingly well compared to the clay stuff without adding any additional chemicals, and it's completely sustainable as well. So why doesn't everybody use this? Well, this litter handles liquids completely differently. Instead of clumping, the individual pellets absorb the urine and turn into sawdust, which needs to be sifted out separately. This really isn't that big of a deal, especially considering all of the benefits, but because the solid waste still needs to be scooped out manually, I completely understand how adding this extra sifting step is enough to discount this as an option completely for the average cat owner when compared to the clumping litter. This property also prevents the use of any off-the-shelf litter robots currently available. So this led me to think, if I can make the daily cleaning of this wood pellet litter just as easy as the clumping litter, I might have a winning invention on my hands. And after what seemed like weeks of designing iteration after iteration, I settled on a design, and this is the end product. This is what I believe to be the world's first dual-stage barrel sieve specifically designed to separate and sift soiled wood pellet cat litter. It works by allowing the user to simply dump the entire contents of a dirty litter box into the top hole here, which allows the pellets and sawdust through this first course filter that separates and contains all of the solid waste. The pellets and the sawdust then fall into this second chamber, which is surrounded by a finer filter that lets just the sawdust pass through, but not the pellets. To properly sift the dust out, the barrel can be rotated and locked into this position and then spun via this crank here. After a few spins, the dust and tiny pellet fragments will drop into the receptacle below, leaving you with a perfectly sifted litter that can be used again. Pull this pin to unlock the barrel and rotate it once more to dump the solid waste from the first chamber into the same receptacle below. Notice that the clean pellets will remain inside the sieve. The user can then place the empty litter box under the barrel and dispense the sifted pellets back in using this big fun red button up top. Then simply rotate the barrel back into starting position and repeat until all litter boxes are fresh and clean. Now, this might seem like an over-engineered solution, and it definitely is, but I didn't settle on this design entirely for cool factor. When I set out to build this, my initial intention was to try and replicate the manual process we had already been using. Anyone that uses wood pellets for cat litter will likely have a layered litter tray with these small holes in the first layer, and you have to pick it up and shake it side to side in order to effectively sift out the dust. I wanted to simply add another tray on top with bigger holes to act as the coarse filter, allowing the same method of pouring the entire soiled litter box in, and then I was going to rig up some sort of motor to handle the shaking aspect, but I really didn't like the side to side motion. This certainly didn't seem very efficient, and if I had to add a motor, then that would add significant cost, and the unit would need to be placed somewhere near a power outlet, which I also didn't love. So I took to Google for some answers, and I stumbled upon this. I loved the idea of using this barrel-style sieve, or trommel, because it accomplishes the same end goal of effectively sifting through everything without the jarring back and forth motion. Now I had to figure out how to make a barrel sieve that had 2 filter stages instead of 1, while trying to keep the form factor to a minimum size. I've seen barrel filters with different filter sizes lined up like this, but I didn't like the length it added, and these work in reverse by starting with the finer stage filter first and getting gradually coarser, which wouldn't work for my application. Like my initial design, I needed a way to filter out the larger particles first before moving on to the finer filters, so I realized if I just took the 2 stages of filters from my original plan and curled them up into a tube, I'd end up with something like this. This format worked out great because I knew that when pouring a full litter box into the barrel, the first stage would only need to hold the large waste, which would take up far less room than the remaining litter. So it was totally fine that the first stage filter was so much smaller than the second stage. And because of this, I actually opted to shrink the first stage barrel even further by making it only about half the length of the second. This made sure I gave myself ample room in the second barrel to accommodate our largest litter boxes. I ran a couple crude tests to see how much space a full litter box would take up in both the barrels by rolling up some mesh to the approximate sizes and pouring a litter box in. I also used this opportunity to test the siftiness of each stage so I could be sure I picked the proper mesh sizes and whatnot. And finally, I cut out some sample pieces of the main structural discs on my CNC out of hardboard to test the fit and make sure I was happy with the design. I did end up changing this inner filter piece as a result of this initial test after noticing pellets were getting stuck. Now that I had the basic concept figured out and tested to make sure the design would work in theory, I had to manufacture the thing. I knew I was going to use this hardware cloth for the filters, but that was about it. I was originally planning on building the rest out of wood just for the sake of getting a working prototype, but considering the application of this, I really wanted to only use materials that could handle a good hosing down if needed. So I decided to go with aluminum and 3D printed parts for pretty much everything else. So the basic concept would let the user pour the litter into the first filter, which would fall into the second outer filter, but I knew I needed a system to both remove the waste and redispense the clean litter back into the litter box. I considered a few different methods for doing this, but ultimately landed on the design I have now because, well, this time it was partly for cool factor, but there are some functional benefits as well. I really like the ability to be able to sift both filters for as long as I wanted, and if I use the same method as most barrel sieves that have an inlet and an outlet, you really don't have much control over how much sifting you can do, and the material just falls through at whatever rate it feels like. So with that, I knew I'd need to keep the bottom of the sieve closed, essentially like a big bucket with mesh sides, but now how was I supposed to dispose of the waste without the clean litter falling out too? And additionally, with both filters having the same opening at the top, what's preventing a user from missing the first filter and pouring dirty litter directly into the fine filter? That's where the big red button comes in. This button added an irresponsible amount of engineering considerations to what was supposed to be a simple project, but I think it was completely worth it. The button connects to these 3 rods which pass through the entire barrel, which double as the main supports for the entire structure. The rods connect to this silicone funnel that keeps the second filter shut and also directs inaccurate pours into the first filter. I made this funnel out of a silicone mat I found on Amazon because it's durable and easy to clean, but mostly due to its flexibility, because when the button is pressed, the funnel actually flips orientation, allowing the clean litter to fall right out into the center of the litter box. The funnel is clamped by these 3D printed parts along the perimeter of the barrel and then attached to this 12-inch brass ring that I got from a dollar store. I didn't realize how impossible it was to glue silicone, so I ended up having to sew the silicone to the ring, and considering I've never sewn anything before, this was arguably the most difficult aspect of the build, but it was a great opportunity to learn some new skills. For the actual button, I connected the 3 rods to this double-layered, triangular-shaped structure, which was both strong enough to press down on all the 3 rods evenly and allowed space to accommodate these pivot points for the spring rods. The spring rods are what prevent the silicone funnel from opening until the button is pressed, and I could have theoretically just stuck a single big spring under the button and called it a day, but I really wanted to make sure the springs were stiff enough when the funnel was closed to prevent any premature pellet dispensing. Since a regular spring is weakest at its least compressed stage, I was worried that a spring strong enough to hold the funnel closed at this position would feel way too hard to press down all the way. The way these spring rods work, however, is the opposite. By angling the springs, I'm effectively splitting the spring force direction in 2, upwards and inwards. As the button is pressed, the angle of the rods changes, and while the actual spring force inside each rod increases, the upwards force in the button actually lessens to the point where it almost has no force at all when the button is completely pressed. In fact, at the moment, the button currently stays down sometimes after pressing due to the upwards force being too low, and I could adjust for this, but in practice, the button comes up the second the barrel is rotated slightly anyways, so I just left it as is. Now I have a button that is strong enough to hold the funnel closed and also feels amazing for the user to press down. I added this crank as a complete afterthought, but it's honestly one of the biggest improvements to the entire design, as there really wasn't a good place to grab the sieve to spin it before this. The crank is just a simple knob I turned out of maple on my drill press because I desperately need a lathe. The entire sieve is mounted on this carriage, which I cut out of my remaining aluminum sheet stock. Each ring has the ability to open up to allow the sieve to be easily removed in the event you want to hose it down. The 2 rings are connected together via this aluminum bar stock, which has a hole where the pivot point is to allow the entire mechanism to rotate. These 2 rings have V-bearings which accept the metal edge of the sieve's primary discs. Finally, the entire mechanism is mounted on this large frame which I cut out of MDF. So these leg pieces were actually a little bit too big to fit on my CNC. As you can see, I couldn't finish the cut there on the top end. So what I did was I actually cut the 2 legs differently. So for this one, I finished the bottom half here. And for this one, I finished the top half. And you can see this bottom half isn't complete yet. So I did that so that I can use each one as a template for the other one to finish up the other half. So the big question is, how well does it work? Well, it works okay, to be honest. This was a project I really wasn't sure if it was going to work out at all, and while I thought about it every day for the last month, I knew there were going to be problems that I would miss. But I don't think it's a fail. It does do what I wanted it to do, and it does it pretty well. Is it better than sifting the wood pellet litter the old way? I think so. Is it faster and easier than the clumping litter? Well, I actually tested this. And they're off. Clumping litter and sifting litter pan, starting with a similar approach, beginning with the scoop. That's a strong strategy, but the litter sieve has a few tricks up its sleeve. An initial dump into the first filter simply can't be beat, but oh no, some of the pellets have accumulated in the first filter. That's gonna cost him. Clumping litter and sifting litter pan follow closely behind with healthy scoops into the waste bin. Litter sieve now already rotated into sifting orientation and spinning furiously as clumping litter and sifting litter pan continue to toss scoops into the bin. Litter sieve, as thorough as he is, needs to pick up the pace here as dust continues to spill out. Sifting litter pan appears to be struggling as clumping litter approaches to take the lead. Litter sieve won't have it though as it rotates into its final form, dumping all the waste into the bin in an instant. Litter sieve approaching the finish line must place the litter box below, but he appears to fumble a bit. Clumping litter taking final scrapes as it takes the lead over litter sieve, but litter sieve still has a chance here as he initiates the button press to dispense the clean pellets back into the pan, but some of the pellets have failed to dispense as clumping litter confidently pushes past the finish line. What a win for clumping litter. Sifting litter pan has begun its sifting operation as litter sieve crosses the finish line in second place shortly after clumping litter. What a shame as he was the real favorite here tonight. Sifting litter pan is still sifting. Oh gosh, this is disappointing for sifting litter pan, but I think we all expected this. Sifting litter pan must dump its waste into the bin before it crosses the line to join the others. Great form there, but let's be honest, this is just sad. Finally, sifting litter pan approaches the finish line, but of course he fails to pour the pellets from the sifter back into the tray. Just embarrassing. As you can see, it does a decent job, but it could definitely use some improvement. The biggest issue I'm having is that the first course filter sometimes gets clogged and won't let the pellets through even after changing the design. I could solve this by opening up the filter further, but this leads to the second problem. When there is a large amount of litter in the sieve, the litter can fall back through the coarse filter when orienting the sieve in the dumping position. These are complementary issues that individually have simple solutions, but at this point fixing one of them will worsen the other. For example, if I enlarge the mesh holes to make the initial coarse filter clog less, it will allow more pellets to fall back through the filter. The other issue I was having is the dust wasn't contained super well, and upon initial tests, I found the dust was getting everywhere, which obviously isn't ideal. This had an easy fix though. I was able to guide the dust into the middle more by adding these plastic sheets around the edge of the sieve. I salvaged this plastic from a picture frame I had, and if I had more, I would have wrapped the plastic all the way around the top too, but it works fine like this. The other thing I could do would be to find a waste bin that fits better in the stand. Now, I love the button, but the dispensing isn't as clean as I'd like it to be. Really, it's just the angle of the funnel that is an issue, and I could probably solve this completely by increasing the steepness of it to encourage the pellets to fall out more readily. But for now, I can just press the button a few times and eventually it all falls out. Despite these issues, what I do love about this design is that it literally makes cleaning the litter boxes more enjoyable for me. Maybe I'm biased and I'm having fun using something that took me weeks to build, but I'm taking that as a win. The other thing I like about this is, since using this, we've actually been able to save a lot more litter than when we were using the sifting litter tray, because scooping always removed a bunch of the good pellets, and sifting often got so frustrating that we'd just toss a full tray in the garbage and start over. Also, considering litter robots are all the rage right now, I think this design, while not robotic, has a major benefit over them. If you have multiple cats like we do, you generally want to have a litter box for each cat, meaning you should have a separate multi-$100 robot for each cat too. With the sieve though, you only ever need the one, and you can get as many standard cheap litter boxes as you like. This makes a product like this potentially attractive for pet stores or animal shelters or cat cafes, especially when you consider the massive additional recurring cost savings by switching over to the wood pellets. And there are no litter robots that currently work with the wood pellets anyways. For those of you who have been sold on switching to the wood pellet cat litter after watching this video, I do highly recommend it, even if you don't have this device. I've attached an Amazon affiliate link to the sifting litter tray that we've been using for years in the description, and if you purchase one through that link, it really supports the channel, and in turn, it will help me produce higher quality videos more frequently moving forward. Amazon doesn't seem to carry the actual litter though, for a reasonable price, but you should be able to find it reliably at your local hardware or farm store for super cheap. So where does this leave us? Well, I wanted to address a few things about this product idea, but also about this YouTube channel in general. This sieve is obviously too difficult to reproduce in any marketable fashion, but I do think the concept is there, and with some redesign, it could be something that could be marketable in the future. The nice thing about releasing these videos is you guys can give me legitimate feedback, and I can gauge some of the validity of the idea on that. It's market testing in a way. My goal with this channel is to be able to share my experience dabbling with product design, as I've always had ideas but never knew what to do with them. I honestly find designing and prototyping to be the most fun thing in the world, but I was always too scared to do anything with these ideas because of horror stories of ideas being stolen. So after years of holding onto ideas and never making any real moves, I decided that it'd be better to take the risk and start sharing some of these ideas rather than never doing anything with them at all. Now, I do have a strategy that I'm going to try out. Starting with this video, I will be getting provisional patent applications on many of the ideas I have right before releasing a video about them. What this means is I'll be able to slap a nice patent pending label on the products in the event that any of these videos take off. I expect most of these products will never make it past the initial video, but considering a provisional patent application costs $100 Canadian or so, I think it's worth it to buy myself 1 year to decide whether or not to file for a non-provisional patent on the idea. Patents are tricky things, and if you share an idea publicly without applying for this provisional patent application first, the patent office will consider your video prior art, essentially meaning it's no longer patentable, as releasing it to the public effectively makes it public domain. Everyone has had that one idea before that might be the next big thing, and while I'm not suggesting you follow in my footsteps and release detailed videos about them, I hope at the very least this encourages some of you to take some action, because the world always needs new ideas. This is how I plan on taking action with my ideas for now, and this strategy might not work out in the long run, but at least I can say I tried. I'll continue to update you all on the effectiveness of this strategy in future videos, and if I do end up taking any of these ideas beyond the initial video, I'll make sure to try and document the process I go through to actually bring the idea beyond the first prototype stage. And finally, I wanted to say thank you to everyone that watched and commented on my first video about the modular DMX lighting rig. I really didn't expect the response it got, and I'm super motivated to continue making these videos for you all. I do plan on doing a follow-up video with an updated version of the lighting rig, which I hope to be able to offer as a purchasable kit as soon as possible, so keep an eye out for that. I'm just starting out on YouTube here, so any feedback is super welcome. And once again, if this type of content gets you excited the way it excites me, I'd really appreciate your support of the channel by subscribing, hitting the bell icon, and dropping a like or a comment down below. See you in the next video.